Hi, I'm Rusty from Rusty's Restoration Shop, and I have here a room divider that is very intricately made up of very small wood pieces. And this piece in particular has some missing sections. You can see there should be some inserts there. And I'm going to take it apart and I'm going to try to restore it to the way it was when it was made. And I'll show you how my process for doing that. I've taken one section off of the hinges and laid it out flat on some sawhorses, and you can see much better now where the pieces are missing. So some of it is in relatively good shape. There's a piece missing here, a couple pieces actually. But overall, it appears to be in solid shape. The box of parts, not sure yet if they're all here, but this came with the divider screen. And I believe this is made out of some type of mahogany or possibly teak, but I believe it's mahogany. So I need to plan for how to get this cleaned up. It's fairly dusty. You can see the edges show a lot of dust. And then I need to figure out a strategy for how to glue this up. I think I'm likely to use epoxy glue since there's not really a way for me to get decent or maybe not even really any clamping pressure. So I'm starting to develop a plan. One is I cut a piece of 1/4 inch plywood to support this from the back so that when I'm gluing pieces in place, I don't have to worry about them falling through. Before I glue anything, I'll put ordinary wax paper down on this so that we don't get anything sticking. So there's quite a few of these that are loose. I also have one where the piece is split. I'll glue that back together with some liquid hide glue before I go any further. The process I've been using to get these completely loose when the part is already somewhat loose. So I don't know if you can see here, this is loose here and here, but it's tighter there. My normal process would be to use a heat gun and heat it up, but I don't dare heat this joint up because that'll loosen these all up. So I'm using a combination of a palette knife if there's a gap in the joint, and very carefully using a utility knife to score the edges. So for example, just very lightly score the corner where there's a ridge of glue. I'm not cutting anything, just trying to loosen that glue up, and then I can put pressure on that joint very carefully. I'd rather not cut my finger off, with kind of wedging the utility knife blade back in there. These don't have a lot of room to go, so I'm going to keep that blade pointed away from me. And you can see it working its way through, and then it just broke loose. It's not quite completely loose. There we go. So then I can carefully lift this out. And then I've got my pieces. And what I've decided to do to clean these up is I have this is one of the cutters off of an old molding cutter head for a table saw. It's nice, and it functions like a scraper for me, and that way I can control it and get the glue off the surface without having to worry about breaking the end off these pieces. I don't need to worry too much about getting these down to bare wood since I'm going to use an epoxy, but I'd like to remove any loose glue and any residue that's would be in the glue joint together. So I'm going to continue finding any loose pieces. I'll probably put some clamps on this 1/4 inch plywood once I get the wax paper down on it, and then I'll mix up some epoxy. I'll use 30-minute epoxy so I have some working time. And I'll probably put a little bit of color in the epoxy because there's not going to be a great way to clean this up either. A soft paintbrush seems to work to get at least most of the dust off, and it has the additional benefit of helping me identify any additional loose pieces that I need to tighten up while I'm putting pieces back into place. I'll probably do some additional cleaning, but at least this will get me started, and so that I'm not gluing to soiled or dusty surfaces. All right, I have the plywood underneath. I've got wax paper on all of it. I'm going to mix up some 30-minute epoxy and put a little bit of color in it. And that should be enough for now. Put the caps back on these things. And I'm just going to use some powdered stain just to give it a little bit of color. Just want to see if this is the right color for us to use. It gets quite a bit darker when it gets wet. Let's see what that does for us. Oh, it may not be too bad. It's a little dark. I'm going to use a Q-tip for application. I've got a couple of these set to go. I'm just going to get some epoxy on the end. Don't want too much, but I don't want to starve the joint either. And get some on both surfaces. All right, let's see if I can get that one in place. Okay. I'll be able to pull that one up when I get this one in place, I believe. If not, I'll have to find a clamp for it. Let's see how this goes. I think we're pretty good. The only one that seems to need some help is this one here. Yeah, these needle nose clamps seem to work really well. It's able to put pressure on both sides at once. So I like how that looks. Okay, so that one's going to go. Okay. Get the other side. While I'm waiting for the epoxy to dry, I'll go ahead and pull a couple more of these hinges off. They're a little rusty, so I'm going to clean them up. Not exactly sure if I'll paint them or what, but they look like they're brass plated. Don't want to mix up the hardware between projects. Yeah, they're definitely going to need some cleaning up. All right, I've poured out some more epoxy. We're going to do some more and give a different approach a try. Put a little bit of this powdered color in there. That worked out fairly well. Get the epoxy mixed up. I'm going to use these. These are for chocolate candy making, like lollipops and so forth. I'm going to try that as a method of applying the epoxy. Okay, some of these are fairly tight fit. It's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle. Alright, I'll use Q-tips here with denatured alcohol on them to clean this up. Wipe it down with a rag. I don't want to get alcohol down in the joint. It turns out I don't have enough pieces in that box, even though there were quite a few. So I have a piece of mahogany here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rip a strip that's this wide, and then I'm going to basically resaw 3 thicknesses on the bandsaw. But I'll start by cutting a strip to width. Got my resaw fence set up and clamped down to the table. I'm ready to resaw. I'm using a narrower blade than I normally would for resaw because the wood's so thin. It's really not worth changing it out for the more aggressive tooth pattern and wider bandsaw blade. We'll see how it works. I tried to leave just a little bit of extra thickness here because I knew the bandsaw was going to give me a bit of a rough surface. So I'm going to use my low angle block plane and see if we can dial in that thickness. See how we're doing on thickness. I'm going to sand it as well, so I want to leave a little bit for that. So all these pieces are a bit of a challenge to keep track of. My method was to put a little square of tape on each intersection where I made a piece or need to glue a piece back in, so that as I'm working with the epoxy, I know where I need to be working, because the epoxy has a limited shelf life or pot life. The other thing I've been doing is on the new pieces that I made. This is just some 2-pound cut blonde shellac. I'm on the previously unsealed wood. I'm using the shellac to seal it. That has the benefit of both sealing the surface so that if there's any epoxy on it, if I get any epoxy, a little excess epoxy on it, it won't stain the wood. And it also brings the color approximately to the color of the pieces that are on the screen as it is. So you can see it darkens it up and gives it a little bit of an amber tone. Not too meticulous about this. I'm just brushing it on to seal the surface. And I'll do that for all of the pieces that I made new. I'm not doing any refinishing on the pieces that I'm gluing back into place unless there's some dire need to do that. When I cut these are all different sizes, so I just cut them by hand. Just used a small dovetail saw type saw and sort of marked the pieces approximately by eye, and then trial fit them, sanding them to the right dimension so that they would fit snugly, yet not have to be pounded into place. So I'll continue finishing these. I've got a few on the other end as well. Then I'll mix up some epoxy and get these glued into place, and we're almost done. Needs just a little bit of tweaking, and I have a piece of 80 grit paper here for just that purpose. Make sure I keep it square. Okay, that should do it. So I'm getting ready to clean up the hinges for that room screen. And you can see a little rusty here and there. And these are brass plated. They're magnetic, so they're brass plated rather than solid brass. So I'm going to figure out how to do that. But I also wanted to point out this is the way the edge view of the hinge should look. But there are 3 of them where the edge view looks like this. I don't know how clear it is, but you can see that the hinge is sprung. So what I'm going to do is try to knock the pins out and straighten the leaves of the hinge, and then put it back together. But first I want to work out a process. These are relatively flat. It's these 3 hinges here that I need to work on in terms of straightening out the bent components. So what I'm going to try first, see how tight these pins are. I've got the vise opened up to the point that the pin will drop through. And I have the small pin punch here. I'm going to tap on it and see if I can get it out. Yeah, looks like it's working. Okay, so I got the pin out. That should enable me to separate these two leaves. There we go. And that'll let me get in here and flatten this out. You can see kind of in that view there how that the bottom of that leaf isn't very flat. So I'm going to figure out how to flatten that out. What I'm going to try first, because this thing is not in a plane, and I'm sure that I'm going to have to overbend this a little bit. So I'm going to try to hang on to it with one pair of pliers and then make a little bit of a bend at a time. Like this. Okay, so this part here, where the pin goes, I'm going to have to bend down a little bit. Let's see how. Might have gone just a hair too far with that. It's starting to look better. I've still got it sprung up a little bit. Let's see if I can. It actually looks pretty good. Just see if the pin will go back in easily. That'll also tell me if I got it. Yeah, it seems to be moving in there. Okay. The wire wheel on this grinder is too grabby for a piece like this, but I've got this non-woven abrasive wheel on here, and it seems to work pretty well. This is just a grinder I picked up at an estate sale for $3. Doesn't have any guards or anything, but for what I'm doing here, it's basically like an open buffer. So. So as long as I keep the top edge away from the facing part of the wheel, I'm not getting any tendency to grab at all. I'm just trying to get the loose stuff off the surface and get this ready to paint. And even though I only had to open up the hinges on the ones that I had to straighten out with some gentle metal forming, this is actually going to make it very convenient to paint. So I'm going to do them all like this. I'll take the pin out of every one of them, lay them flat like this, and then be able to spray both sides, and that'll give us a better look. So I'll continue with this for the other 7 hinges. I finished cleaning up the hinges on the wheel. And of course, since those were brass plated, it took all the brass plating off. There was no avoiding that to get all the corrosion off the surface. So I sprayed these each side with a coat of a gloss gold metallic paint. I also cleaned up the heads of the hinge pins that we pulled out. I did that on the wheel because there was enough of a shank I could hold on to them, and it was easy to do that safely. Then I cleaned up off camera the heads of all 36 screws. These were brass plated as well. I just sanded these flat on the workbench with a piece of 320 aluminum oxide paper and then painted them as well. So I have everything ready to reassemble the hinges and then put the hinges back on the screen sections, and we'll do that next. So our next step is we have to get this thing folded back up so we can put the pin in. And these are not as obvious as it would look to fold back up. So we need the pin, if you remember, that was on the outside. So it was an isolated pin instead of being two pins in a row. So the way this works is you fold that over, tuck it in, and then fold it out like that. And then you have the single pin on the outside, and then the rougher surface, which is what was on the wood on the screens, will be on the same side. So I've got that one folded up. I'll get one of my pins off the plate. All I did was I used a hole punch to punch a correct diameter hole so I could push these in. And then the pins go in from the bottom. Sort of tap that in. There we go. Did a good job, didn't damage the pin head, and these swing just fine. Tap this one a little tighter. Okay, I'll do that 8 more times. All right, I was careful to number these panels so I know the order in which they go back together, and I also know which sides face each other. So it's just a matter of putting these hinges back on to hold everything together. So I'll start working on that. Although it's not an original brass finish, I think the painted finish actually looks pretty good. Kind of pops. Now these panels aren't exactly flat. Over the years, looks like they've warped a little bit. So that's what you saw there, that I had to push this down a little bit in order to get it the holes to align. I'll be careful not to scratch up the hinge at all. As far as I know, all the screw holes are intact. I don't think I have to tighten up any of the screw holes. Okay. That motion you see there is just the hinge acting. There's no motion. The hinges are tight down on the wood. So I think we're good. So I'll continue with that, and then we'll have the entire screen assembled. This is the screen fully assembled, and after a final cleanup step, I think it looks all right. Thank you for watching my video, and I'll see you on the next project from Rusty's Restoration Shop. Take care.